It is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker for the 2022 Life Member event. Guy Eastman was born and raised a third-generation member of the famed Eastman outdoor family in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Now living with his family outside of Cody, Wyoming, Guy has been hunting and filming Western trophy big game for over 40 years. Skills he was taught at a very young age by his legendary father Mike and grandfather Gordon Eastman. Soon after graduation from Purdue University with a degree in engineering, Guy returned to his hunting heritage and outdoor roots to work in the family business as the publisher of the Eastman's Hunting Journal. Thereafter, he co-founded the Eastman's Bow Hunting Journal and is now the host of Eastman's Hunting TV, airing on the Outdoor Channel for more than 2 decades. The allure of hunting and fly fishing has taken Guy to nearly every continent on the globe in search of adventure. But some of his most memorable endeavors have come from his native state of Wyoming, where his family has gladly called home for 5 generations now. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Mr. Guy Eastman.
How's everybody doing this morning? So nice to see a great crowd out here so early in the morning. Like most of you, I've been living on Zoom calls for 2 years, so it's a little different to be in person. Hopefully I'm not too rusty. I used to do this a little more than I have in the last 2 years. But anyway, I wanted to first off thank Glenn and the team, Gray and the team here at Wild Sheep Foundation for the very gracious welcome, and the leadership board and the directors for having me come speak to you this morning. First, I want to start off with a little bit of a disclaimer. As Glenn told you, I'm an engineer. I'm not certainly not a lawyer, but I want to put on my lawyer hat here and talk to some of the younger guys out there. I attended the Less Than One event last night, and that was one of the neatest things I've ever been to. I know that sheep hunting isn't easy. Sheep hunting's not cheap. It's hard to get into. I was one of those guys 2 decades ago. I never thought I'd go on a sheep hunt. I thought it was out of reach for me. But organizations like this and the hard work these guys have put in have made a way, or found a way for younger guys to get involved. And I just want to talk to those younger guys real quick and give them a little disclaimer. I have to warn you, the endeavor you're about to undertake is contagious and addictive. But it's worth it. You'll never know how you're going to come out the other end, but you won't be the same as you start when you start your sheep journey here soon. So I want to start off by talking about hunting and a little bit of hunting roots. You know, trophy hunting is conservation, and conservation to this magnitude is not cheap and it's not easy. In 1957, there were 25,000 bighorn sheep in North America. Today, that population has more than tripled to over 85,000 wild bighorn sheep on this continent alone. This massive wildlife conservation success story is based on the hard work and efforts of this very organization, along with state game and fish agencies, through sound wildlife management practices that specifically include management through trophy hunting when it comes to sheep specifically. This includes, for the most part, only taking the older male animals on a very limited basis from the herd. In fact, only about 1% of wild sheep are actually harvested on this continent. And when you add global sheep herds, it's even much less than that. I wish my solar panels produced as much energy as that. We're taking less than 1% of the resource and leaving over 99% of it on the mountain and generating this kind of energy and effort and money behind the conservation to do this. This is the very technique early conservationists like Teddy Roosevelt used to bring nearly all of our big game populations back from the brink of extinction well over 100 years ago. This is a story that is not often told correctly. Today, in the world of fake news and media bias, trophy hunting is not poaching, and poaching is not trophy hunting. Trophy hunting is and always has been the bedrock foundation of the North American model for wildlife management. When Glenn and Gray asked me to come speak here to you folks this morning, they made it a point to specifically ask me to highlight some of the classic sheep hunting footage from my grandfather Gordon's archives. I thought, no problem, that should be easy. It's something I'm very passionate about, and I could speak for days on that. I'll save you the days of my blather and try to condense this down to only a few short minutes. I know that they're going to give away a sheep hunt here, and that's probably why a lot of you folks are here. So without any further ado, let's take a little walk down memory lane. We're going to start off with some of my grandfather's very, very early footage. I dug up some stuff that not many people have seen out of his archives. So if they'll start the film, we'll get started. My grandfather Gordon, I was fortunate enough to grow up in the shadow of a grandfather who was a dedicated sheep hunter enthusiast. But even more than that, he was an adventurer. His whole life, later in life, his adult life, revolved around adventure. Gordon could be found all over North America, oftentimes getting himself into some predicaments. He was a noted bush pilot, which got him to some places that not many people had seen. This is in 1959. He was out on the ice pack in Alaska hunting giant polar bears in his Super Cub. If he wasn't there, he would be home in his home state of Wyoming, traveling around looking for big mule deer bucks, which he was also passionate about, crossing icy rivers, risking his life after big mule deer bucks. But it didn't start off this way. Gordon, like so many, was a generation that came back from World War II, the greatest generation. And the greatest generation created the golden generation for hunting. A lot of Gordon and his generation came back from the war, and this is how it began for Gordon. Gordon, when he got back from the war, went to gunsmithing school, and when he got back home to Omak, Washington, he apprenticed under a guy named Al Beeson. This is Al Beeson right here. He's one of the finest gunsmiths in all of North America, out of Spokane, Washington. Al Beeson had a very, very notable client. The one and only, you may recognize this guy, Jack O'Connor, who lived just down the road in Lewiston, Idaho. Remember when I warned the young guys about this being contagious? This is where Gordon got the sheep bug. Jack O'Connor was what we would call today a super spreader. Thousands and thousands of guys read his articles and got into sheep hunting. Gordon was one of them. But Gordon wanted to take it to the next level, so he started filming his hunts. This is some very, very early footage. This is in the 1950s. Gordon started guiding for a guy named Lee Holden out of Alaska. This is in the Alaska Range in the 50s. Now, Gordon was also a pioneer, but he was also a tinkerer. He was always looking for a better way to do things. I'm sure these clients of his wondered why he wanted them to bring the sheets from their hotel room in Anchorage out onto the mountain with them. So Gordon, I can just hear him saying, put those on like a bib and go out there and shoot that ram. I'm going to film you doing it. So these guys are wearing these sheets like a bib, like fools out there on the side of the mountain, but evidently it worked. You can see the equipment's very remedial back then, and Gordon, being the great guide he was, made the clients pack out their own sheep. Some things haven't changed, right? But Gordon kept ratcheting things up. That was a very small Bolex wind-up camera. He mortgaged his house, got a bigger piece of equipment, a bigger camera, and started filming bigger and bigger adventures. This was his next adventure with family members. This is my Uncle Brad in the middle. He's 16 years old. Gordon was notorious for filming family members in his films, mostly because I think they were the only ones that could put up with him yelling at him constantly. Brad's on a sheep hunt. This is in British Columbia. They're hunting stone sheep in the 60s. That's John Payne in the front, one of Gordon's buddies, and Brad towing behind on Brad's first sheep hunt. The sheep bug doesn't always bite people equally. This is Brad's first sheep hunt. And he sneaks over real close. A lot of these sheep at that time had never seen a person. Especially in Alaska, you saw that with the sheets. They had no idea what was happening. Brad makes a perfect shot for a 16-year-old, heads over there, and John Payne says, "Wow, Brad, that's a really fine ram. It's a really heavy stone ram. Is that your biggest ram to date?" Brad said, "Heck, this is my only ram. I've never killed one before." "Are you kidding me? 16-year-old kid?" I think Brad was traumatized by being soft-hatted by John Payne, and he never shot another ram the rest of his life. He guided to dozens of them in our home state of Wyoming, but never took one for himself. At this time, Gordon started working for Walt Disney in Hollywood, which was another interesting twist. He would work on this is in the 60s, and they started first doing big, large movie sets. And Gordon worked as a cinematographer on a lot of those sets in Hollywood in the off-season. And then he would come back in the fall to the West and use some of those techniques and the things he learned about the cameras and cinematography and create some of these hunting films that he would tour all over the West in auditoriums, in school auditoriums and movie houses and show these videos and these movies. But like any good Irishman, Gordon was good at a few things, and he was also a quirky guy. Gordon was very good at looking for rams that might be a little out of reach for someone else, but he would be able to come back and hunt himself later on. And this is one case of that. After my uncle left, Gordon found this ram with two others and went back in for 2 weeks with his camera on his back, filming himself, and it took him 2 weeks to finally get the ram killed. He considered that, like most of us would, his finest trophy he ever killed. And even until his death, that ram hung behind his easy chair. He'd sold off most of his trophies, but he kept that one clear till the end. His next adventure would be even bigger. He was going to the Northwest Territory. These are some of his counterparts in the greatest generation. That was Warner Kosher on the left from the Yukon, a very notable outfitter, and Gordon's friend, Danny Gibbers, on the right. Danny's one of Gordon's childhood buddies. He's a apple farmer in Washington. Like any good farmer, he was missing a few fingers. So he's real noticeable. But Gordon was invited by the province of Canada to come in, province of Northwest Territories, come in and film when they opened it up for the very first time in 1967. Nobody had ever hunted in the Mackenzie Mountains, and there was only folklore from the Indians whether there was anything in there to hunt. Stan Burrell was an outfitter from Alberta, Sundre, Alberta, he was an outfitter known for woodland buffalo hunting, and they got brucellosis, and so the country, the government, had to go in and kill all the buffalo off, and he had no way to make a living. So the government gave him the entire Mackenzie Mountains as an area to go have at it and see what was there. So they contacted Gordon to come in with his filming equipment and film a hunt in there as promotional to try to get hunters to come in there if they were successful. So Gordon and his two friends, no family members on this one, went in there and literally, as an exploratory mission, hunted in there to see what was there. My brother and I, 50 years later, were lucky enough to go back and trace those very footsteps, 50 years almost to the day in the exact same spot. So what we're seeing here is a little before and after, 50 years ago. Of course, Gordon's buddies had sighted their guns in for sheep hunting at 400 yards. They had no idea they would get to within 60 yards of a band of rams, almost 50 of them in the bunch. They set up and shoot right over the rams. Shoot again, right over the rams. And you can imagine, Gordon was behind his camera yelling like crazy that he was almost out of film, and he mortgaged his house to get clear up here, and you morons shoot right over these rams 3 times. And by the time they finally got 2 rams on the ground, he was out of film. As a lot of you who've hunted the North Country know, that dehydrated food, a little of that goes a long ways, and they were happy to have some sheep meat on the ground, and not very much of it made it out of the back country. Even to this day, this country hasn't changed much. The equipment's changed a lot, the camps have changed a little, but those mountains haven't gotten any easier or any less steep. And you know how sheep hunting is. Ike and I started up the mountain. This is a Canal Outfitters. The outfitter's actually a gal, which is really neat, and her father was in camp and saw a big ram, spotted a big ram across from camp. So Ike and I started across and started hiking at 9 in the morning and climbing and climbing and climbing. And you guys have been there, I'm sure, climbing and climbing. And you have to get above a sheep to kill it. And the sheep are climbing and you're climbing. And finally, you get above them and are able to make the shot. Interestingly enough, 50 years earlier, Gordon had done the same thing on the very same mountain. After all the sheep hunters were gone, he was able to go across the valley and climb the mountain and kill that ram on the very same mountain 50 years, almost to the day earlier. It's almost a surreal experience, very emotional. A lot of you guys who sheep hunt will know what I mean by that. It's an emotion that for some reason, only sheep can create. But for us, this is a generational deal. My grandfather hunted there in the 60s, my father hunted there in the 90s, and then me in 2017. But Gordon would be happy to know that not much has changed. When he was in there, he thought it would be gone forever in a matter of time. But it's just as good or better hunting, thanks to organizations like this, than it was even back then. Gordon's adventures wouldn't stop there. He continued on. This is some scenes from the Phantom Ram. This is in the late 70s, early 80s. Then this is where I got bit by the sheep bug, right here in Nevada. This is southern Nevada. Gordon had me helping him when I was a high school kid, only 15 years old, filming desert sheep. We started filming and we explored some and looked at some of the projects they were starting to do with the water guzzlers and drinkers, some of the first ones for desert sheep that I'm aware of. And he was very fascinated by that. And that's where he kind of got his grassroots conservation approach after seeing that. But sheep hunting's brought a lot into my life, like most of you. It's taken me places I never thought I would see. It's taken me places Gordon never thought I would see. Gordon always used to talk to me about the big sheep of Asia. And in his time, that wasn't available. It just wasn't an option. But I was able to go there a few years ago to a continent far, far away, to elevations I never thought I would survive, and hunt Asian sheep, an opportunity my father and grandfather never had. And a lot of you have probably had this same experience. And that's when I was talking to those younger guys, what I mean, you never know where you're going to end up. I never thought I would kill a ram in my life, let alone be able to travel around the globe twice, chasing sheep all over multiple continents from one side of the globe to the other. This organization represents the very ever so sharp tip of the spear, the conservation spear. There are many conservation organizations out there like this one this day and age, but very few like this one. This room represents the engine room of the conservation world. As one of the leading, if not the leading, conservation groups in the country, no organization puts more money, passion, and hard work into conservation than this one. The very core of any organization like this is the life membership. This group represents the nucleus and core of this organization. The future leadership of this organization is more than likely sitting in this room right now. The future of this great organization, its mission, its purpose, its direction, rests on your shoulders. The future of literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of wild sheep scattered all over this continent and this world rests on your shoulders. It doesn't matter if you're on your first time here, like I am, or you just buy a raffle ticket for the less than one club, or if you plan on bidding for the Montana governor's tag. We all make a difference in our own way, and none can be defined as small or insignificant. Conservation is a three-pronged approach. Funding, which is money, and it takes a lot of it. Funding a machine like this is not cheap, and sheep are expensive. Your voice, that's your political capital. By being a member of this organization, you lend your political capital and your voice to Gray and his team to take to various organizations, state agencies, provincial agencies, Washington, D.C., and even global governments to try to push forward our agenda for sheep conservation globally and on our continent. And the last, and a very important piece that often gets forgotten, is the volunteerism. This is the boots on the ground. These are the guys in the local groups, the Wyoming Sheep Organization, the Montana one, the Idaho, every state and province out west has one. These are the guys doing the groundwork, the fencing projects, habitat projects, water guzzlers, the things that really make the difference on the ground. These all make a difference in the larger conservation picture. This is work that matters. My grandfather was a huge believer in grassroots conservation and wild sheep. He was on the ground floor of this organization when I was a young kid back in the early 80s. He almost never missed a sheep show. It was one of the few shows he ever went to. He and the founders of this great organization had a very clear direction and purpose for this organization, and that was to put more sheep on the mountains of North America. And I would be happy to report to him, if he were here today, that the directive and goal has been reached and surpassed in many aspects, taken beyond their wildest dreams, so to speak. In my opinion, no conservation group does more for their cause than this one. Sheep hunting ain't cheap, and sheep conservation definitely isn't cheap or easy. This group raises the necessary funds needed to keep growing and protecting sheep herds throughout the world over. I've seen many of these success stories with my own eyes. I and my family have benefited personally and professionally from the very hard work and dedication represented in this very room. And for that, we thank you. All of you who come together and make it happen for this very precious and ever delicate natural resource. Thank you, and may God bless you on your next quest or your passion for everything wild sheep related. I just want to leave you with a very fitting quote from the late, great Jack O'Connor himself. Quote unquote, "There's no halfway. After his first exposure, after his first exposure, a man is either a sheep hunter or he isn't. He either falls under the spell of sheep hunting and sheep country, or he won't be caught dead on another sheep mountain again. I think it's suffice to say that most of us in this room are happy to be forever stuck on the side of that mountain. Thank you, and enjoy your last day at the sheep show this year."